I mean, I pledge allegiance to the flag and my mom just flipped over in her grave, by the way.
Thank you. Well, does everybody have their flags up today?
Flag Day.
It is
Always
Flag
up.
Day.
Always do. Always up.
Also National Bourbon Day.
Oh, okay. All right, so first item is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. Is there any public comment before we start the meeting? Yes, sir, Mr. Castle.
Morning. Don Castle, 57 Firethorn Place, Hardeeville. I wanted to take a moment, Commission's time, to express my gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to serve on the Planning Commission for the last 10 years. I've listened to many presentations, discussed development issues, problems. I know this commission will continue to make decisions that will better the city of Hardeeville, mold the city of Hardeeville into one of South Carolina's best small towns. I want to wish the commission, Mr. Rosello, its new member, continued great work and dedication to this commission. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Don. You were farther down the agenda, but yes, we certainly thank you for your service and helping us all as we came onto this body. And I wish you the best in the future. Moving on, I'd like to welcome Richard to the group. And as you go through this, Don talked about discussions and sometimes disgusting meetings that we've had here. But welcome aboard. We look forward to working with you. So if we move to old business, we have approval of the April 12 minutes. Do we have any comments from the Planning Commission?
Let me have in here.
Okay, I have, oh, do you have? I have just a couple of notes that I made, and maybe this isn't the right place. But one of the things that Mr. Foreman brought up was he caught a discrepancy in the presentation, and the PDD was going to be modified to take some of the things out of the checklist that was in there. During the review, some things took a while and didn't. So anyway, we didn't have all the documents, and there were some changes in the language that were going to happen. And I don't know.
The language changed.
It did
Yeah,
change.
it did have everything in there. We don't know why that statement was in there, that it didn't, but it was a full application, complete application. So that was deleted, and it was sent on to council without that language.
All right.
And with your condition on that as well. So
All right.
They were informed.
Now, has that come before the your committee? Come on, I'm trying to
Site review.
staff review. Yes.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not
Okay. Because another thing we talked about in there was the buffer being a little on the small side compared to what we have in the MZDO and other places. And,
Not yet. They're working on all of it.
okay. So, all right. So, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right. That now takes us down to new business, which is training the heathens on the board.
And I'd like to apologize for the technical difficulties, as well as Katie is actually in SRC right now. We had a case before that was planned for last week, and they didn't all show up for that SRC. I think Mr. Foreman was there, so they're handling it now. It was something that had to be added on the end today, and that was a little more important and a little more not more important. That was a little more pressing for her to be there for SRC, and I could take care of this. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the video will not play for me, and so I pulled her out and tried to get her to play the video. It won't play for Katie in here either. And instead of taking you all into another room, I thought I would just go through the handout, make sure that others have it. Katie did some research. We talked a lot about what kind of of training, what kind of information we wanted to present to you. We wanted to present something that was definitely timely and important as we're moving through the MZDO rewrite as well as White Hardy Boulevard. Um, we know council um, and we as applications are coming in and pressures are, we have to get this MZDO completed and the rules changed for White Hardy Boulevard a little bit, and make sure we're moving forward on what we need to be doing to meet the master plan standards. And this was one of those documents, one of those trainings that popped out, and we thought it was really good. I really wish you could watch the video. We were going to show you most of it, not all of it, because some of it got into some code reform that was really a little bit further along, a little more detailed than we need to talk about at this point in the game. But we'll try to go from Katie's notes and go through the introduction of it. It is a handbook for improved neighborhoods, and as I mentioned before, enabling better places. It talks a lot about what is a walkable community, what is new urbanism, or a you know, I can't get the video to play, but if you want to work on that, I'm just trying to go through this because we could not. We tried everything. I couldn't log in. I couldn't log in as Katie, and Jessica couldn't log in. So enabling better neighborhoods is the um, gist of this document. It comes from CNU.org, which is the Congress for New Urbanism. If you want to know, just kind of in a little nutshell, what new urbanism is, what neo-traditional design is, what towns, it's a town center. It's that old buildings up close to the street. It's walkable. You have a sense of scale. It's a place you want to be and you want to walk around. So, and that's really what we're trying to establish for White Hardy Boulevard. We're trying to pull it back. We've got a huge wide right of way, a lot of traffic, especially when I-95 is backed up. It's not going to get better. It's going to increase, especially with the widening project going on for I-95. So how can we make Hardeeville a place people want to stop and walk around and spend some time, take a break from their drive? And why do we have to go to Bluffton or to the island or to Savannah to go shop, eat? Let's make Hardeeville one of those places that people want to be, a destination. So this article is about reinventing these spaces, creating that, giving us ideas for code. A lot of times, my thesis when I was at Clemson was about you have these plans, these master plans and these comprehensive plans. They just describe all these wonderful things. And we're going to do this. But your code, your zoning doesn't allow for it. Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, if you've ever been down there, it's gone through a lot of changes in the last 30, 40 years. But they wanted all this new urbanism. They wanted these neighborhoods where you had the mixture of neighborhood conveniences and residences, and she got it. Your list is right here. Katie's much better at this than I am. Yeah, we talked about that. Mr. Foreman got to understand that one because he was there last week. So, and on that note, while she's getting this playing, just remember that we are going to be inviting you to specific SRCs individually. I think that was a very good several meetings that went through for that. So when Katie finds the right one, she will make sure she has all of you in attendance at some time or another. Now, this is better than me.
Hi, I'm Lynn Richards, President and CEO of the National Congress for the New Urbanism.
And I'm Susan Henderson, Principal with Placemakers and a board member of CNU.
Zoning and codes represent the very DNA of your community. They dictate how tall buildings can be, where and how parking goes, and even where and how much landscaping is required. Yet, for many communities in the United States, their zoning codes are outdated. They don't reflect current conditions, and they don't reflect the community's vision for where and how they want to grow and develop. Updating outdated codes can be an incredibly complicated process, which is expensive and time-consuming. Today, we're going to talk to you about a code reform disruption that CNU has been pioneering that starts at the state level and then drills down into the biggest little thing that cities can do to dramatically enable better places. In today's course, we'll be discussing what walkable urbanism is and what are the barriers to achieving it. What is incremental code reform and what is the methodology behind it to ensure context-sensitive solutions?
We'll also be looking at the range of contexts in which the code reform occurs. This is structured on place types within the rural, the urban, and the suburban contexts. And then we'll give you a series of solutions for the context that you can implement at home. So the biggest takeaway from this course for you is that you will strategically be able to choose what you think you can get done in your city.
After today's course, you'll be able to assess whether or not incremental code reform is right for you, what are the initial steps to start, and then specifically what you can do to your codes and ordinances to start the process. So let's get started.
Let's get started. This is much better than me talking.
CNU's mission is to champion walkable urbanism. In this chapter, we'll describe what walkable urbanism is and what the components are. I often get asked, what is walkable urbanism? The short answer is that it's a place that is compact, mixed use, with a range of choices on where and how to shop, work, play, and get around. And it's a place where people and businesses can thrive and prosper. It's sustainable and it's healthy. But it's actually more than that. When we talk about walkable urbanism, we have to keep in mind the public realm, the space between the buildings, because that's where the magic happens. That's where we are able to use design of the community, design of the neighborhood, design of the street to enable people to come together and to gather. And that's really what we're talking about. At the end of the day, it's that dynamic between the built environment and the social component which exist in these places that enable us to create socially just neighborhoods that are environmentally resilient, economically prosperous, and are people-centered places. That is walkable urbanism. In this chapter, we'll discuss the wide range of barriers that prevent more walkable urbanism from being built. Where and how communities are designed, planned, and built are very much a local issue. Yet many people don't recognize or don't realize how the federal government creates unintentional barriers. For example, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Housing Urban Development Agency all have requirements around water infrastructure that promote and finance low-density development. Additionally, where and how many of the developments are financed are dictated by rules governed by HUD, even if you're not using federal funding. Additionally, federal funding rules play an enormous role in determining which product types can be built and financed. If a loan does not meet the requirements under HUD funding, even if you're not using any HUD funding, it can't be sold on the secondary market. This financing barrier has been an enormous barrier for many communities trying to create more walkable communities. Demand for walkable urbanism has never been higher, but that demand is not spread out evenly. In market preference surveys over the last 25 years on both sides of the aisle consistently say that about 50% of the population wants a more compact, walkable urbanism neighborhoods, yet the other 50% are demanding more of the suburban development, low-density suburban development type. In good development processes, residents and stakeholders are included in the very beginning of the conversation. And in not so good development processes, they're included at the end to submit comment. In both of these cases, the issue of fear of the unknown, the fear of what next can rise to the top, and the issue around and the dynamic around not in my backyard becomes a dominating force, stopping or delaying many development problems. The public, first off, will say, what are we going to do with traffic? Because walkable urbanism requires higher density than what you have in suburban conditions. So invariably, inevitably, concerns are raised about where are we going to put the cars? Where's the traffic going to go? We have shifted our priorities from designing cities for people to designing where and how cars can move. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, dear God, I want to sit in traffic today. People get up in the morning and they think, where and how can I go about my day in the most enjoyable mechanism possible? We need to shift our perspective away from where are we going to put the car infrastructure and to think, how am I going to live my life today? A big part of why we can't get more walkable urbanism is absolutely the local land use regulations, such as parking. Significant barriers come up on that as local ordinances set where and how much parking you can have. Where's it going to be? How many cars are going to be parked? And what are we going to do about the day after Thanksgiving? I challenge all of you to go out the day after Thanksgiving and to take photographs of the empty parking lots. Stormwater requirements are another incredible barrier for walkable urbanism. Many cities and towns have stormwater requirements that are better suited for a suburban condition. Take, for an example, a city in Tennessee that requires that for all development, including redevelopment, you have a stormwater pond. Imagine you're downtown with a stormwater pond. Better would be to look at what are the street level solutions that can better manage your stormwater and really enhance the pedestrian and walkable environment of your city or town. Street design standards are another way that walkable urbanism is prevented. Many cities and towns take their standards from state documents which require wider lane widths. Wider lane widths mean that cars go faster. The faster cars go, the more dangerous it is for pedestrians. Is that really what we want from our walkable places? Areas of danger for our grandparents, for our parents, for our children? Finally, zoning codes, as we discussed, haven't been updated in decades. Zoning was intended to protect residents. It made no sense to put residential next to an industrial plant, and that made a lot of sense. However, there are now loads of unintentional consequences, such as we discussed, unupdated zoning codes that are decades out of date. Today's zoning codes have to reflect the current priorities and the current conditions faced by many cities and towns today. And that's what we'll be discussing in the next chapter. What is and how to achieve incremental code reform.
So in this chapter, we'll begin by just reviewing the place types that we use to create the coding solutions. The biggest issue that we all need to be aware of is that context really counts. And as you see in this image, I love this because it includes all of the contexts that we normally use, which are rural. We have yet to provide solutions for the rural environment. We should, and hopefully it's going to be something we do in the future, because the whole thing about agricultural preservation, landscape preservation, that's very important. Suburban and urban, and by urban, like Lynn mentioned earlier, we really mean walkable urban, not urban sprawl. And so each of those situations and contexts have a different series of solutions. Also within each of those contexts, we identify place types, because that's something most people can understand. People know what their main street is. They really know what their downtown is. And so when you say that you're providing a solution for the Main Street, then they understand it's not going to apply to the suburban context, and the anxiety level goes down. And so the two urban contexts for the heart of the city, we see main streets more often in towns and even villages. And then a downtown, of course, may have more than one main street, and usually will, especially in larger metropolitan areas, as well as large office districts and general mixed use. The next step down is the neighborhood. And we'll talk about this in some detail in the next chapter, but we make a distinction between the urban and the suburban. So when we say neighborhood, we're talking about the compact, blended density, some mixed use, institutional uses, like the image you see on the left. When we use the word neighborhood, we're not talking about subdivisions. That is another place type that we actually do provide solutions for, but that falls within the suburban context. And then once you get into the purely suburban context, we also have provided coding interventions for suburban corridors, which all of North America has an abundance of, that need some interventions. And then also large-scale shopping centers. And when we use shopping center, this can be from a neighborhood center to all the way up to a power center and a regional center. We have not yet found really strategic solutions for malls. Those really do require a new master plan, but there's lots of mall retrofit work that has been done before. In the next chapter, we will get into the details of each of these specific place types, and we'll discuss the coding problems that they have and then the interventions that we suggest. So in this chapter, we will go through specific issues within each place type that we discussed in the last chapter, beginning with neighborhoods. I think this is the biggest takeaway. The image on the left is what we mean when we talk about a neighborhood. This is Alexandria, Virginia, and it's a 5-minute walk, which is the blue circle and arrow. It's a 5-minute walk from the center to the edge. And in the case of Alexandria, the neighborhoods there, the historic neighborhoods, are bounded by mixed use, largely retail shopping streets. And yet within the heart of the neighborhood, you'll find parks and institutional uses and civic spaces. And it's this incredibly rich, diverse environment. You also find mansions on half-block lots, huge lots, and then you find tiny little flats within subdivided row houses. So there's an amazing diversity within a single neighborhood. And this is the way the United States and North America in general was built historically. The image on the right, on the far right of that image, you see the little street to the right of the major arterial. That's my street. I grew up there. This is Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville's done many great things in their downtown in recent years, and one thing they do sublimely well is develop suburbia. And so that is what this is. It's also at the same scale as the image on the right. And you could say, well, Susan, there's lots of diversity here. Yes, it's the intersection of two major arterials and a highway. It has single family detached, like this house I grew up in. The 5-minute walk for me was to the Ben Franklin's on the corner across the major arterial. And it has 2 churches. It has a diversity of garden apartments. And for the most part, the single family is all the same price point. So what you get within the same area is all of this disconnected pods of development. And that is what most of our codes today will produce across North America. And so when we talk about neighborhoods in this context, it's the image on the left, not the image on the right. So what are the zoning issues we have today that we're writing interventions for? Most of our historic neighborhoods have non-conforming lots. The lots are too small. Conventional Euclidean ordinances that were written mid-20th century all will have a minimum lot size. And what most of those ordinances do is they make illegal our beautiful historic neighborhoods. They also have an abundance of nonconforming uses, because historically you would have the corner store, you might have a barber shop, you might have a pet store. There are lots of things that were historically embedded in neighborhoods that are now illegal with our separation of uses. And you will have nonconforming densities. Most neighborhoods historically built granny flats or accessory dwelling units, and many cities have made those illegal with their fear of density. And finally, conventional parking requirements have made it almost impossible to redevelop in our historic neighborhoods, because we require universally 2 spaces per dwelling unit in most cities in North America. And so what that means is you have an empty lot in a beautiful neighborhood that could be very well developed with multifamily, for that matter, small apartment buildings, maybe a triplex or a quadplex. But because you're requiring 2 spaces per unit, you can't make that work. Main streets are the next category, and they have their own set of problems. Some overlap with neighborhoods. The biggest one is parking location. So often now, zoning ordinances don't locate parking at all. They just tell you the number that you have to have. And so what we see in the redevelopment of historic neighborhoods, like this is in historic Savannah. It's just right south of Oglethorpe Square. And the problem is, under their code, until they recently updated it, is if something happened to this building, it could be redeveloped with the parking in front. And think of that impact on this beautiful Main Street. The next thing is the parking requirements. It's very similar to the neighborhood situation in that if on-site parking is required at suburban levels, there's no way that you can redevelop a historic Main Street properly. Build 2 lines. Lynn mentioned that in the prior chapter about Rick Bernhardt from Nashville, and his simple solution was just saying that you must put the parking in the back and you must build the building near the front property line. And then permitting mixed use by right, because people are afraid of the whole NIMBY movement. Many people are afraid these days of multifamily, especially rental. Lots of downtowns that we work in actually make residential illegal. I know that's hard to believe, but it happens. And then one final thing that is critical to the economic success of a Main Street is transparency, and by that I mean glass. So often today, if you install a storefront, it has reflective glass or it has tinted glass, and you're almost guaranteeing the failure of that shop because the pedestrian can't see what's in the window. The next place is downtowns. These very much overlap Main Street, so I won't talk about the duplicative ones again. But the biggest issue that we have with downtowns is how you manage height transitions to the adjacent neighborhoods. And so often it's an on-off switch, and this is where the residences come out and very justifiably distressed over the thought of a tower in their backyard. And so these sorts of transitions have to be thoughtfully developed to be able to coordinate with adjacent neighborhoods. So the next context is the subdivision, and this is in suburban category, obviously. And we're finding that many of our clients, as in my private sector work, many of our clients these days are actually looking for interventions and discrete densification of neighborhoods. They understand that there's this huge market preference for walkable urbanism, like Lynn mentioned. And not only that, there is the desire to have an economic diversification of their communities. They want to be able to provide first-time homeowners a location. They want to be able to address the millennial preference for rental. And so the discrete densification is a really important tool when you're looking at how to evolve your subdivisions and keep them from becoming non-viable in today's economy. And then finally, providing neighborhood destinations. This illustration is one we did for a very suburban community in North Carolina. And they were looking at uses that their affluent neighborhoods would be willing to accept. So the coffee shop and the restaurant and the ice cream parlor were all things that those neighbors told us they were interested in. So we illustrated and wrote code for how they might be included. And then corridors, this gets very complex, and we're just finishing up with CNU the work on suburban solutions in the state of Michigan. And one thing that we found in that context is that there are different types of corridors, and you have to be able to identify the solutions appropriate in each context. For example, the streetcar suburbs are almost perfect. You just change their setback, let them build in an urban format, and it works beautifully. So often thoroughfares, however, with contemporary functional classification, they have limitations on lane widths and where on-street parking occurs, and God forbid that they're a state DOT-owned thoroughfare, because all of those things, the character of the street really will impact the work that you can do on the private property. If you can't have on-street parking, you can't ask the building to pull up to a zero lot line. It just won't survive. If there's not teaser parking for retail, the retail will be defunct very shortly. So things like parking location are absolutely crucial, and so there has to be this declension of solutions based on context. In the next chapter, we'll do an introduction to the areas of reform that we will provide solutions for in the following chapter. This very short chapter is a brief overview of the areas of reform that we will discuss in the following chapter. And I want to begin by saying that the list that we will talk about today is for the urban context, the solutions for main streets and downtowns and adjacent neighborhoods. We have a whole separate set of areas of reform for different contexts, like, for example, the suburban context. And recently, with our work in Vermont, we have an entire separate set that we utilize for affordable housing solutions. So this will be different at each state level or for each particular problem that you face. In this case, we're talking about the biggest little thing, like Glenn mentioned, is they're just the simple solutions that achieve the greatest impact in each of these categories, and throwing all the darts at the board and coming to agreement on what the biggest problems were in those various contexts. This is what came forth. We're dealing with streetscape, and one of the biggest issues here is finding the solutions that are context-based. And so often in conventional suburban development these days, it's a one-size-fits-all for the entire jurisdiction. So the streetscape solutions are very context sensitive. Dealing with form, and this is like the bread and butter of most zoning codes. It's heights and setbacks and lot coverage and densities. And then use, and being able to open that up to mixed use in most cases where it's a compatible use, or broadening the definition of use. Frontages, and this is one thing that most zoning codes don't address at all, but it's the thing that makes all the difference. Like Glenn was talking earlier about building community and the public realm and considering the space between the buildings. The one thing that private development contributes the most to a person's perception of a city or of a town as they pass through it is what happens at the front of the building. And so often codes ignore that altogether. So we talk about that, and then finally parking, and as we've both discussed in great detail, it's where it goes and how much it is. So in all of this work that we do, we are focusing on vibrancy and pedestrian activity. If you're picking your biggest little thing wherever you are living and working, make sure that the goal is the experience of the pedestrian. I love this image. It is in New Orleans, and as you probably know, it's one of the cities in the United States where the pedestrian rules. And I actually feel sorry for the motorist in this city, because the pedestrian is so comfortable that they take over the entire public realm, and that's our goal. So in the next chapter, we will talk about the solutions for each of those areas of reform. In this chapter, we'll talk about specific code solutions for each of the areas of reform: form, frontage, parking, streetscape, and use. And just as a recap, these are only focusing with the urban context, not the suburban, and not other specific issues like housing affordability. So the first one is form. And like we mentioned before, this is dealing with setbacks, building height, lot coverage, typical things that zoning ordinances address. And in some situations, it's just as simple as removing a particular metric. For example, we were working last month in Vermont with their housing affordability issue, and so many of their historic lots were illegal. And so the recommendation was simply to remove the lot size minimum from their ordinance as it pertained to the historic neighborhoods. So frequently, it's just one little thing that really isn't applicable anymore anyway. For example, in a historic neighborhood that's already been fully platted, the lot size, it's irrelevant. The only thing it's doing is making things illegal. So if it's removed, then those lots can be maintained and redeveloped over time. The other thing is historic setbacks. So often a conventional suburban setback, and I can't tell you how many cities this is in, is 20 feet minimum. And in a historic neighborhood where buildings were built at 8 feet or even 0, we see that in very urban neighborhoods that there's a 0 lot line for row houses. And so it's as simple as removing the setback. Or at a minimum, if people are too nervous about that, you just say that it matches the existing adjacent lots. And finally, the building height. So often it's 35 feet. And I don't know who picked that number out of the sky, but we see it. I see it in New Mexico. We see it in Vermont. We saw it in Michigan. We see it in our private work almost everywhere we work. I don't know who loved 35 feet, but it jams in 3 stories and it does a generous 2 stories. And at the end of the day, we recommend that you codify in stories rather than in feet, because then that allows the builder the flexibility to do the floor system in an appropriate way to the use. For example, the ductwork is bigger in commercial than it is in residential, and that gives them the flexibility to build a more elegant building, and a building that will be appropriate for cross ventilation or for daylighting. So many things about the metrics and form. Really, it's safe to remove them altogether. Building height you'll need to maintain, but that should be 2 stories. This is an example of a neighborhood it was in Andersonville, Illinois, so in the Chicago metro. And it's incredibly beautiful, but my guess is it would be almost impossible to replicate today because of the very narrow side setbacks, the narrow front setback, and the building height. The next area of reform is frontages. And like I mentioned before, this is probably the single most important piece of work you can do to improve your city. And the very first thing is to set a maximum front setback. So often setbacks are just minimums, and you have to be 20 feet back from the street, but it doesn't say that you can't be 50 feet back from the street, and that's a suburban standard. So what we like to do is, say a Main Street, for example, where you want it at 0, but you say it can go to 12 perhaps, or 8, to allow room for a front sidewalk cafe, but you don't allow it to go to 20 or 30 because then they can put the parking in front. So if you set the maximum front setback, you've gone a long way toward improving the pedestrian experience of your street. Another thing that we always recommend in an urban environment is require a usable entry facing the sidewalk. Frequently today, if it's a new redevelopment, Even if you require the building to be at the street and the parking is in the rear, the primary entrance goes on the parking lot. And that's fine, but you're ignoring half of your clientele, the people that pass by on the sidewalk. And so for the sake of the success of the business and activating the street, you require a usable entry on the sidewalk. And then, like I mentioned before, the issue of minimum transparency. In this video that is on the screen, this is a beautiful frontage. It has the transparency that we've talked about. And one thing you do about the transparency is you have to take a survey of the buildings that are beloved and that you want to remain legal and make sure that you match that minimum transparency to your local context. It has a usable entry. It has a 0 front setback. This video shows exactly what we're trying to achieve with these coding interventions. And then this image, I think this is my favorite urban storefront anywhere I have seen in the last decade. This is again in New Orleans. The clarity of the glass in this frontage, it was late afternoon, but you can, even with the exterior light, you can see all the way to the back of the shop. I can see virtually everything they're selling. The success of the business is going to be tremendous because they're enticing the passerby in. The other thing that's wonderful about it from an environmental perspective is with the clear story glazing, you get light all the way into the back of the shop. The energy demands from lighting will go way down because of the daylighting provided. The code should be written in a way regarding your frontage that this sort of a image is what your goal is. And that's one thing about all of your coding work. We say that we try to extract the local DNA and put it into code. And so chances are you have a place in your community that everyone loves and that's the ideal. And if you just go and itemize the things that make it what it is and insert those into your code, then chances are excellent that you will have success. So the next issue is parking, both location, like the icon on the left, and parking minimums, like that on the right. And we've talked about this at great length, so I won't belabor the point, but it's requiring parking lots to be behind the buildings, actually requiring on-street parking, because that's the only way that commercial uses will be successful is if they have teaser parking, and eliminating parking minimums. The elimination of parking minimums has become a national best practice. And in cities like San Francisco, for example, you have to get a variance to provide a single new parking space just because land is so valuable. Now, we're not suggesting that, but just consider the fact that parking is regulated already by financing. If the new project has to be financed, the bank will require the amount of parking that they feel is necessary for the success of the business. So whether it's residential or commercial of any sort, office or retail, it is going to be very tightly controlled by the financier. It's also going to be tightly controlled by market demand. No developer in their right mind is going to do a new project that doesn't have enough parking spaces to either sell it or lease it. So cities really are in the wrong business when they're trying to regulate parking numbers. Frankly, they don't have the expertise, haven't done the studies, and most of the numbers we see in zoning ordinances today for parking seem to be completely arbitrary. So we actually suggest that if you have the political will that you eliminate parking minimums altogether. So this is Excelsior, Minnesota, and it's a delightful small town outside of Minneapolis. And these shops are extremely successful retailers, and parking is solely supplied on street. And none of them have any complaints. Like I said, the lease rates are high and their sales are high. So in a small enough context, it can be completely supplied by on-street parking. In more urban environments, then of course there needs to be parking lots behind the buildings. The next category of reform is the streetscape. And like I mentioned earlier, the issue of context is everything. And fortunately, even the Institute for Transportation Engineers in collaboration with CNU a few years ago, worked on a context-sensitive street manual, and there is an understanding that's slowly emerging amongst transportation engineers that the context really makes a difference. And when you have many pedestrians, you need the traffic to go slower for safety, for health, safety, and welfare. And so within the streetscape realm, the first thing to do is to establish or protect your existing on-street parking. And this can be complicated in state-owned roads, like we mentioned before. But if you begin those negotiations with your DOT, usually it's a 5-year window where they start to make streetscape improvements. And if you begin to make those negotiations early, you can get your street categorized as an urban section. Many states are actually adopting the context-sensitive street standards at the state level. Implementation is a little trickier, but we recommend that you really look into it. The next issue is to providing context-based bike facilities. And by this I mean on streets that are designed for slow speeds, having shared lanes are perfectly adequate, but we're finding more and more often the value added both to the commercial uses and to the residential uses with protected bike lanes is really critical. And then finally, awnings and street trees and things that improve the pedestrian experience within the public right-of-way. This gets really tricky with your public works department, but it's something that you should begin to work on if at all possible. This is a sweet little main street in Carbondale, Colorado, where my husband and I were for a little vacation recently. And I love it because they have fairly small sidewalks, but it's difficult to move curb and gutter. And for their population, they're perfectly adequate. But they allow benches in the sidewalks, they allow signage in the sidewalks. They've taken over parking lanes in some locations with cafe seating. So they're using everything from face to face of the building in an incredibly useful way for the individual's experience within this public realm. The next issue is use, and this is fairly simple. We recommend two things. One is to permit mixed use in almost every zoning district in the urban context. So downtowns, main streets, and adjacent neighborhoods. And I can't tell you how often, like I mentioned before, that we see downtowns that prohibit residential. That's a political challenge to get that changed, but we strongly recommend that you remove that requirement, largely because of the market preference for urban living, and you're missing a huge market segment with retiring boomers and millennials that are beginning to purchase and are looking for rental if you're not permitting those in your most urban context. And then the other issue is simplifying uses. So by that, what I mean is we often see zoning ordinances that say it's retail. They'll say barbershop and beauty salon and day spa. And you know what, folks? Those are all the same thing. So to be able to consolidate your uses in a way that give you flexibility in keeping your storefronts full. For example, we worked in one place, Decatur, Georgia, a few years ago, great little historic downtown, but it was right at the beginning of the rise of the brew pub, and they had never written a category for that. They had no idea where to put it. So it was all living out in the industrial zone when they really wanted it in their downtown. So if you can broaden your uses enough to permit the cool new thing, then it means you don't have to have a crystal ball to know what all that is in advance. This is a new community that actually built from the ground up with that sort of diversity of use that we're recommending. The final thing that you need to be aware of is to map the places, to ground yourself in where you are, and to apply the Main Street solutions in a Main Street context and the neighborhood solutions in a neighborhood context. And to understand that unlike Euclidean zoning, the same solution doesn't apply in every context. So just to summarize, if you do nothing else, do this. This is my list. Set a maximum front setback, require parking is behind the building, and permit compatible uses in most zoning districts. And in the next section, Lynn will talk about the impact of incremental code reform.
Thank you. I just want to hit on a few things, and Katie can jump in here if I don't. I want to finish my thought when I was talking about my thesis, because it's been a long time working on my thesis. Exactly what she said. I had all these great ideas. Mount Pleasant had all these great ideas of what they wanted to do, and the code would not allow it for those various reasons that she just mentioned. Um, it's taken them 25 years to get theirs, Mount Pleasant, meaning, and Port Royal, to get their zoning to allow what they wanted. Those were the two of the examples I used in South Carolina. It takes a long time to get this. We are at a great point where we can start this. On that note, I wanted to say we're not talking about doing all of White Hardy Boulevard the same way. We've got three very distinct districts on White Hardy, three areas based on the master plan, and we want to make sure that those zoning codes meet the form that we want to have there. So that's what we're going to ask as these drafts are coming through for you. That's one thing we want to try to remember. And South Carolina DOT, yes, we are slowly starting to take streets and roadways in some of the newer areas and in our Commerce Park, but it's slow and few and far between. In South Carolina, they own a tremendous amount of right of way. Other states, counties, cities, others have owned a lot of the right of way. Not in South Carolina, and that's one of the reasons we have the problems we're having. And they are trying to work on that. We're trying to work on that. But frustrating as all is, it's much better relationship we have with them today than we had 5 years ago. Wouldn't you say that, Kate? So it is improving. Also different than a lot of the communities that showed. I think that last one she showed was a new community that they just created. That's really what we're going to have to do. We have very little to no historic, significant historic to Hardeeville, but not made. So we have to create those areas and where it should be. The As a planner, very passionate about that maximum setback versus the minimum setback. Very, and I can't tell you how many times we're in a conversation about something that we know should be closer up to the road. Our library, for one, down the street. We wanted it closer up to the street, and it was argued. But it's a nice little place to walk. It's going to have the Veterans Park right there beside it. It's going to be a really neat with the courtyard and everything. Very, very nice place, pedestrian friendly. The direction we're trying to go. And the final thing I wanted to say, I know, like I said, I don't know if Katie has anything to add. As she said, the same does not always apply. So as we're presenting some of this thing to you, we're not talking about changing the entire city. We're talking about changing different things. Obviously, you're talking about where multifamily should go. It shouldn't go right in the middle of some of your gated communities. There's very different rules, and we want to respect that and respect all of our citizens. So I thank you. You want to add anything?
I purposely skipped over a few of the sections because I didn't think you needed to know how to do code updates when we're already going through that. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and we're going to continue to look for more continuing education opportunities that we can do in smaller increments for you. And then the handout will have a little bit more information that you can look at home. So thank you.
Right. Time for manager report then.
Oh yeah, I'll start with the MZDO. We have gotten an email in the last 24 hours on some landscape standards and tree preservation, and Katie and I are fighting all the format changes and all the red lines, and we're trying to go through and review it. We will have that done, and hopefully be moving forward on that section. We are slowly but surely reviewing drafts and getting drafts in, but we're still on track for that August, September-ish timeframe to have everything in front of you and council. So we look forward to it, and we're learning a lot as we go along. We're learning some things we had in the ordinance that who knew. We're a lot of things that why are they there? Let's make sure it's not there. We want it more user friendly by far. So thank you.
Question, Ronna. You say August, September timeframe. So in that timeframe, that's when we'll get the new MISDO?
You will get drafts along the way. It probably will. It may even start in July. It's just I don't know those exact dates right now, but you're going to review it before it goes to council.
But I guess my question is, before we can start applying it, it's got to be approved.
Yes, by
Okay.
council. It's going to go through that public process of you and council.
Okay.
And real quick, I won't keep you long because I think it's about to storm. But we did have staff review committee this morning. Went a little long, so I apologize for that. We looked at two projects. One of them is the relocation of Wendy's to the other side of the interstate at exit 5, where the fireworks store is next to Quick Trip. It hasn't been in operation for a little bit. That will be redeveloped as a Wendy's with a brand new product that they only have in one other state in one location right now. I just found that out this morning. So we're looking forward to seeing what that product looks like as far as the elevations go, but has a nice little patio to eat outside, and it's more friendly to the mobile orders and people using the apps nowadays. So
We do all the time. That's
the other project is a project in the Commerce Park that's going to be a flex space for different light industrial type warehouse users. So we looked at that. Thank you, Mr. Foreman, for coming last week, and we'll continue to reach out as we have strong agendas. I didn't invite anybody today because I was afraid that it was going to run a little over. So we did issue a permit for Harvey Place, which is the Farino project down on Main Street here that, there's been a slab just sitting there for a while from a former proposed development there. That will be townhomes there. They went through Board of Zoning Appeals because townhomes is a special exception. It's a very nice looking product, and we look forward to seeing that with some more affordable type housing in the downtown.
Do you have to rip out the slab that's there and all the undergrounds that were put in and start from scratch?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And they've encountered some interesting, issues with the old sewer lines on that property and everything, but we're happy that it is going to finally come to fruition. So
It's not an Indian burial ground, though.
no,
That would really mess the project up.
Millstone up the road across from the Public Works Department, they have started phase 2. I think phase 1 is pretty much fully occupied. That's really nice to see. I see the school bus go there some afternoon, so we've got some families in there. Clarius did start their clearing and grading process. So that is the industrial development that's down off of Levy Road. That is underway. And another one that went to staff review committee recently, last week actually, was Heron Point, which is at Gateway Crossings down Main Street. It's going to be across from Walsh Drive. That is also a Farino development with duplexes and single family detached. They went through the first round of comments for staff review committee, so we'll be working with them over the next few months to get those resolved. Residences at Oakity Crossings, they have submitted for their clearing and grading portion to be immediately followed by their full development plans. So that is under review as well. We've had 2 or 3 items on staff review committee every week, so we will be reaching out to have more of you attend. It's been very busy, but really good to know that things are still strong in this area. So, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a quick question or request.
Mhm.
Can we get an updated contact list with phone numbers and emails and addresses for
Yes.
the 5 of us?
Yes, we'll
Great.
send that. We'll make sure you have that. Yeah, I think we sent it out under a new group that we tried to create for you. And I think there were some IT issues, so we'll send it to your emails this afternoon. So,
All right, any other comments for manager's report?
You wanna go first?
Okay.
No, you do.
and welcome, Mr. Arzillo.
Couple of 3 questions. Status on downtown hub. What's going on with that?
I know that the work on the Veterans Park is moving forward. You know, the RFP was issued and they're working on that. I will certainly get an update and send it out from Mr. Davis. There are continuing meetings and working, and I look forward to seeing activity. We are taking down the Dasher House and the Dasher House garage, which has asbestos. So they are going to be mitigating the asbestos. If you've ridden by, they've already taken the shingles off the outside, and that's going to be the locations for.
Why I ask is because you say there's been committee meetings. I'm supposed to be the veterans rep on that committee, and I have yet to been to a meeting.
I will pass that information
Okay.
along, sir.
Second question, the 72-acre commercial area on 278 next to Margaritaville, is there anything going on with that?
Not that I know of. I don't have. I'm not privy to what the owners of these properties are doing. But I know that we had a meeting with some of the officials and some of the property owners out there recently, and I know that there's activity across 278 on the 20 acres on the smaller lot. But if I hear anything, you'll be one of the first to know.
Oh,
So
'cause
we can't make them build, so yeah.
Mr. Mearsman can attest. I mean, we keep getting questions. Well, there's a new sign up. What's happening? Oh, okay.
We understand and we empathize, but I don't have any information.
And then one other question, and this may be a little rhetorical. I was over on Hilton Head Lakes last week and noticed that at the golf club restaurant, there's a new patio, but I had not seen any permitting signs up for that to be done.
Yeah, Katie can speak to that. It was not required for permits on that.
That was inspected by the building department and determined that there were no building permits required. They did get zoning compliance check, but there's no building permit required at this time for that. If they do anything else where they try to enclose it or anything like that, there will be a permit required. But the deputy building official and several inspectors were out there.
And our inspectors are out there frequently, and they had seen it as well.
I was just curious because, I mean, if I wanted to add a patio on the back of my house, I have to get a permit.
Right. Yes, and they did get the zoning permit. They had that compliance check, but this one did not require a building permit because of whatever in the building codes that I can't speak to. So yes, I understand.
Okay. That's all I have.
All right. Mr. Foreman, why don't you give us your impressions of the SRC meeting?
Well, yeah, there's 3 things I wanted to mention. I don't know if, are we in the member comments section now? Or? Yep. Okay. Yeah, I was really pleased to be invited and attend the staff review committee. I think anybody that would go to it, anybody in our community it would give them a real sense of confidence to attend those meetings. I mean, the staff does an exceptional job of reviewing on a wide range of things. They really know what they're talking about. Sometimes they have a jargon that's a little hard for lay people to follow, but it was very impressive.
So before we go, we should get a magic decoder ring so we understand the jargon. All right.
It would be helpful.
Okay.
The second thing I wanted to say was, I'm really glad Don's here today because I don't think I ever got a chance to say anything more than we'll miss having you on the commission, but you really were a great example, I think, you were always so well prepared. You had a great vision about things that you were interested in. You were very consistent, and you were really very generous and a great colleague to be serving with. You're a great example. Thank you so very much.
Here, here.
And then the last thing, and Councilman Mearsman said that he was sort of closing in on this, but for the last several meetings, I've been asking for the number of residential properties, residential units that we have permitted, but which have not yet have occupancy permits issued. And I wondered,
We
I
are,
assume this is a piece of it, of what he's asking for.
I'm not sure I know.
I think that was out of the Argent Triangle discussion.
I did not, I was not, I was out of
Right,
town.
that-
I did not attend.
But it looks like,
There's more, there's a lot more to it, and it is a huge, huge spreadsheet, and it's a lot of moving pieces. Mr. Davis and I have been working on it. Mr. Davis is taking the lead. I will tell you, we don't want to put it out there and give you that number, and we haven't done all of our quality control.
sure.
But from attending that meeting, you know how busy we are on a day-to-day basis and pulling all the right things. I was out of town for that meeting. I don't know exactly. I've been updated, but yes, we will have an accurate account of building permits and all of the things that have been entitled versus things that have been platted. So it's going to be a whole train. So we are
And
definitely working on it.
As I've said before, the reason I am really interested in that number, I mean, I think it's a very important number for a community growing as quickly as we are. But my particular reason for wanting it now is that, in the community, you hear all these precise numbers that are wildly different.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's 18,000, sometimes it's 30,000. And, I mean, I think I'm less concerned about the precision of the number. If it was an estimate that, a couple of hundred this way or that way, I recognize why you don't want to do it. But my concern is that I think that as a community, lots of people who are interested have wild ranges of things that we're talking about.
We want everything documented and everything as well as we can. And one of the other things is like with these older, I heard before the meeting you're talking about these older ones. I'm gonna use Morgan Track because we don't have anything, but they are, as far as we know, getting ready to come in with an amended PDD, which will have very different numbers. What happened with Anderson Track, what's happened with East Argent, very different numbers than we actually started out with. And so now that those projects have started moving, we'll be able to refine that number a lot. And yeah, it was 30,000, it was 50,000, but is it going to be a more palatable number soon? And we cannot wait to get it to you. So we're working.
all right. Our newest member, Richard, have any comments today? They're coming. All right.
I have nothing.
All right. That pretty much covered everything we had. All right.
I'm with it. I too want to thank Don for his guidance on this commission. I learned a lot from him. And I want to welcome Rick. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but hopefully you enjoyed as much as the rest of us do.
All right. Well, with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.